Coding Dojo is a programming school that turns beginners into developers in only 14 weeks. Over 90% of their grads land jobs within 3 months of graduating, often making over $70K per year. To learn more, visit codingdojo.com or click the link in the description below. Hey guys, in this presentation we're going to be talking about starting a project, and I don't mean just a quick project for an idea you had yesterday or a tutorial that you're following. That's fine to just jump in and start experimenting. I'm talking about a professional paid project or even your own really serious project. And this could be any programming project, but I'll mostly be talking about web development, whether it's a website, a web application, or a mobile app. And with every presentation like this that I create, you should take everything with a grain of salt, because there's no one path to take for everybody. There's not even 10 or 20 paths. There's a lot. It all depends on the developer, the project, the situation, and so on. So the purpose of me making videos like this is just to give you some insight and experience. I did client work for about 5 years or so, I'll be talking a little bit about my experience with that, as well as what I've researched on what works in general for most people. But again, something that works for me may not work for you, so just keep that in mind. Alright, so this is kind of a tough video to make because there's really three main situations for building projects, at least three that I could think of. So one is you're a freelancer or you run your own company, and this is where you're actually dealing directly with the client. It's basically all on you to get all of the requirements and get the client vision, etc. Then you have the situation where you're working for a company, and chances are you don't even talk to the client. You probably have some kind of project manager or tech lead that is giving you your requirements. And then third, you may be building your own project. Maybe you have a great idea for a web app, or you're building a website. Whatever it is, in this case, you're the only one that you have to deal with. This is obviously the easiest of the three, but you also have a lot of choices to make because things aren't just being thrown on your desk or being told what to do by a client. Alright, so my approach in this video is to kind of stay general, but freelancing and running my own company is where most of my personal experience lies, so I may tend to talk about that situation a bit more, but you can just replace the client with the project manager. Both of them are sort of your boss in either situation, and even for your own project, just minus the boss part. Alright, so we're not going to go into finding clients or finding a job or even brainstorming a project. We're going to pretend that we already have a solid project that we know we need to build. So the first step is to be completely clear on all of the requirements and know exactly what you're doing. You don't want to go into a project with a half-ass idea of what you're building, and you don't want to start without the materials that you need. Okay, so you want to get the objective and the scope of the project. Unless this is your own, then you should be able to get all of the information from your client or your project manager. Now, if it's a project manager, it should be pretty easy. If they're a good project manager, they should already have a plan for you, all laid out, what you need to code. A client is tough because they don't always know what they want. Even if they think they do, a lot of times they don't. So working with a client is a tough thing to do, and it's part of the reason why I do what I do today. You also have to be a good communicator and not only understand what they want, but also be able to convey what you're going to do, what's possible, things like that. So make sure you have the scope of the work. Are you going to be building the entire application or website or part of it? Are you going to be deploying it? What features are going to be included? Do they already have a design, or is that something that is up to you as well? Are you adding the content? Are they going to add the content? These are all questions that you should be asking, and you should actually have a complete list of questions that you're going to be asking, especially if you're dealing straight with the client. Alright, you also want to know things like the purpose of the project. Is it to sell something? Is it to connect people together? Whatever it may be, this will help you craft certain aspects and features that will help make that app or that website successful. Alright, same with target audience. You should know who will be using this app or website. If it's geared towards like teens and young people, you can usually have a more advanced interface, but if it's for older people that aren't as technically inclined, then you should have a really easy to use and intuitive interface. And that's just one example of why you should know your target audience. All right, another thing that you want to make absolute sure of is the technology requirements. Now, if you're working for a company, you probably have a standard for full stack applications and things like that. For instance, maybe your company uses C# on the back end and Angular on the front end. Most companies stick to one or two stacks unless, for instance, the client asks for something different. Now, with freelancers and people that have their own businesses, it's usually up to you unless the client specifically wants, let's say, a WordPress website. Typically, clients won't request like a framework or anything like that unless they themselves are developers and they're basically outsourcing to you because either they don't have the time for the project or they don't know enough to complete it. Now, if it's your own project, you have all the freedom in the world to choose your technologies. I would suggest going with something that you're very comfortable with, something that you've used before, and also something that's pretty popular, so that you have a bunch of resources that you can refer to if you get stuck. Okay, I wouldn't suggest using some new framework you found on GitHub that came out a month ago where there's no documentation for, because if you get stuck, then you're pretty much screwed. All right, so you'll need to think of things like the language you're going to use, the framework, database, maybe a UI framework like Bootstrap or Materialize. You may have someone that does the design for you, or you may do the design yourself. All right, another thing to think about is external APIs and services. If you're going to be using, let's say, Google OAuth for authentication, or you're going to be using some external data API, make sure that you get all that stuff down and any extra costs that come with that. Okay, a lot of, for instance, data APIs, a lot of them are free until you hit a certain amount of requests and then you have to pay. Make sure you have all that stuff down, and if you're dealing with a client, make sure they know those costs. Okay. Now, your budget is really something you're only going to deal with if you're a freelancer or you're running your own company. It's really important to document exactly what you're going to do for exactly what price. It's also up to you to set either a fixed or an hourly rate. I'd suggest going with a fixed rate because you have value in your knowledge and your experience. It may take you 5 hours to complete a small project that would take someone else with less skill 30 hours. Should you be paid less? Of course not. You have that experience, which allows you to do it faster. So I'm not a big fan of hourly pay unless you're actually working for a company. I wouldn't suggest doing it with clients in most situations. So one thing I can say is you want to make sure you put everything in writing. So from the budget to the entire project scope, you want to put that in writing, print out some documents and have the client sign it. That way there's no confusion later down the line and they're not asking for extra stuff. All right, you also want to think of deployment. If it's a WordPress or a basic website, for instance, you could basically host it anywhere, even on a shared host for a couple bucks per month. If it's like a Ruby on Rails app or a Node.js app, you may want to look into options like Heroku or a VPS like DigitalOcean. But again, if you work for a company, chances are they have their ways already, and you basically just need to conform to that. And you probably don't even have to worry about that yourself. There's probably a DevOps guy that does all that stuff. All right, so once you